Hello, everybody. On behalf of the board of Norwegian PEN, I would like to welcome you with all my heart to this major event of our festival. As you know, we are celebrating 100 years, and please read this and come back every night if you want to, and tell your friends to come as well. There are more outside, so bring them into your lunch room or to your friends if you can, please. Help us really spread the word. This is a big event for us, and we are so proud that Stella Moris is here tonight. And we're going to talk about the fight for Julian Assange, as you know. So I'm just going to give you a few practical pieces of information. Of course, we're very happy if you would support our work. PEN stands for poets, essayists, and novelists. And now it's so much more. It's also people who are really using their voice to fight for freedom of expression, which we think is more vital than ever. And we are a member of PEN International, and their values or their motto is promoting literature and freedom of speech. We hope the session is we'll be able to finish in about 1.5 hours. And we have some very distinguished guests. And the Professor Emeritus Rune Ottosen is going to take you through the panel debate. But first, I'm very happy to invite to the stage one of Norway's big legends, the artist Lars Klevstand. The floor is yours.
Wow. Okay. Visa om løgna, Alf Prøysen, selvfølgelig. Tonen var min. This was a song about the lie, how to become a friend of the lie. I'll continue with a Swedish song. I have translated it. I don't think it matters for you, but for these people, hopefully. The song about courage. En sang til mote. Mikael Wien. Her en sang til mote. Han til alle deg som vågar sjå en morgondag om natta kjennes lei. Her en sang til mote, så enkel og så raus. Jeg syng han sjøl om dagen kan synes meningslaus. Her en sang til mote, til glede, ro og liv, til deg som tror på kjærleiken, tross alt hat og kiv. Til alle som slår seg sammen, til alle som stiller krav, til deg som vet hvor hardt det men jamvel sier ja. Her en sang til mote, han til deg som vågar sjå, som ikke let seg kneble, men sier klart ifrå. Til alle som bygger bruer og ser hva som skal til, og vet så vel at menneska kan gjøre det de vil. Her en sang til alle som nektar å gi opp, til deg som kjenner lengten om andre sier stopp, til deg som kjenner lengten mot det de vet rett, som ikke let seg tynge, men plukker på sin rett. Her en sang til mote, han fra meg til deg, ei enkel lita vise som ropar høyr på meg, så vakta han vel og lær han, og nynn han inn iblant, så veks han, og han spreier seg til alle verdens land.
I think he deserves the title a legend. Thank you, Lars. And Lars will also come back at the very end of this session and end this evening for us. Thank you so much. We have in PEN, we are actually courage. The song was about courage. And courage is what PEN is all about. And at all meetings during the festival, we have an empty chair. And of course, there's an empty chair today as well. And Jenny Herrastved, who is the coordinator for the festival, will say just a few lines about today's empty chair.
Norwegian PEN marks 100 years of fighting persecuted journalists and writers this year. Assange's case is central for us. We have been advocating for him for years, stronger and stronger. Because free speech and the right to publish uncomfortable and critical truths are at stake. We stand by Julian Assange.
Thank you, Jenny. And then I will give the floor to Rune Ottosen, who will take you through the evening. And it will also be possible to ask questions to the panel at the end of this session.
Good to see so many people, and welcome to all who watch the screening as well. I'm Rune Ottosen, as said. I'm head of the Assange-committee in Norwegian PEN, and we are so proud to have Stella Moris here, and also a wonderful panel. I will introduce Stella in short, and then after she had spoken, we will have the panel up here, and I will introduce each of them before they speak, and we will have a small round in the panel, and then we open up for questions and answers. When you take the floor, please state your name and try to be short and precise. Stella Assange grew up in southern Africa before moving to Sweden and Spain, and then to UK for her tertiary education, where she studied politics and law at Oxford. She met Julian Assange in London in 2011 when she joined his international legal team. So it was as a lawyer she met him. They have 2 children, born 2017 and 2019. Stella and Julian married in March 2022 in Belmarsh Heart Security Prison. Not so merry romantic circumstances for a wedding, you can imagine. Where Assange now is isolated after COVID, serving in a very harsh treatment. I will also recommend the film Ithaca, because this shows not only Julian Assange's case, but the context with the family and how to live in this situation with a family, children, and you loved ones that you barely can meet. So I do recommend that. And I'm very proud to say the floor is you, Stella.
Thank you, Rune. Can you hear me? And I'd like to thank PEN Norway and everyone who's put this together. It's really important that Julian is recognized ongoingly, and that his case just gets more and more prominence as time goes by, because we're really in a race against time. And I'll speak for about 20 minutes, but I was thinking, what can I speak about most usefully? And I think I'll explain a little bit about, to give you an idea about how Julian is and the circumstances within Belmarsh, because it's all a bit abstract, I imagine, for you. And this is the thing with political prisoners, right? They just kind of become silenced and forgotten, and that's the hope, that if you seal them off from the world, then people will just not think about them anymore. So that's part of the reason why we did that film Ithaca, to show people that he exists, that he's a human being. He's been dehumanized for many years, and that's why we wanted to show Julian as a human being, and that no human being should be treated this way, especially not one who has actually dedicated his life to fight for justice, to fight for truth. So, as Rune mentioned, Julian had COVID. He had, I think it's about 3 weeks. He was in isolation for about 9 days. When I say isolation, I mean solitary confinement. He was in the cell 24 hours a day during this period for about 9 days. And then when he was released, out of that 24 hours a day, he was released into normal Belmarsh isolation, which is about 21 hours a day, depending on the day. And so we're talking about extremely harsh conditions, even on, in any routine day in Belmarsh. And Julian has been there since the 11th of April 2019, when he was dragged out of the embassy. So we're nearing the 4-year mark now inside Belmarsh. When I visit Julian, I can visit him once, sometimes twice a week. And I go sometimes on my own, sometimes I go with the kids. And about once a week, the kids come to see him. And it's a very intimidating environment, as you can imagine. The worst, the extremely serious cases go there, so there's terrorism cases and so on. And Julian is in a wing, and about a third of the people who are on that wing are in for, murder, manslaughter, that kind of thing. So you can just imagine someone like Julian, who is he's an intellectual. He's a very mild-mannered person, and that kind of environment of extreme isolation, and the contact is with prison guards or prisoners. It's very rare that he actually gets any quality conversation with the people there. He can call me, he can call his lawyers, he has restrictions on who he can speak to, and so, his contact with the outside world is very impoverished, and it's basically what we can get to him. When we see him, we're in a big room, a big hall, with about 40 other prisoners and their family members. We have about 1 hour and a half together. The children can sit on his lap. He can read books for them if there are books available. You can't bring anything into the prison, not even a handkerchief. So you have to go through multiple layers of security. They take your fingerprints 3 or 4 times. You go through airlocks. They check inside your mouth, behind your ears, and your hair. Often there's a dog search, checks you front and back, and the children as well. So it's a nasty environment, and it's meant to be that way. So it's really, I wanted to bring this up because in some ways, when you talk about Julian while he's still in Belmarsh, and some people ask me, well, how is he doing? And even though he's better than, 10 days ago when he had COVID, he's not okay. And the longer he's in prison, the worse he gets. He had a mini stroke in October, almost a year ago now. And that's indicator, obviously, of more severe problems with his health. But Belmarsh is not a place with adequate health care either. The process so far has taken 3.5 years. And I want to talk a little bit about the process. I know there are a lot of questions about where we are in the legal case and so on, but I want to make a bigger point. We can go into where we are in the legal case, but the bigger point is that the process is the punishment. And whenever I'm asked about where we are at in the appeals, it is somehow, I really reject the question, because it supposes that there's some kind of legitimacy to the process, that this process is something other than a punishment in itself, something other than a political persecution, something other than a instrumentalization of the law in order to silence Julian. And that's exactly what it is. And when I speak about the legal case, I almost lend it legitimacy. And so that's why I kind of reject the idea. I just want to do like maybe a big historical sweep of where Julian was coming from when he started WikiLeaks and what WikiLeaks means to where we are today. So WikiLeaks grew out of certain movements that were underway in the early 2000s. One was the movement opposing the Iraq War and the so-called War on Terror. And the second was a age of increased government transparency. As in, there was a consensus in societally from, the government, the state, and civil society and so on, that the government should be transparent and should be accountable, and that there should be new legislation, the Freedom of Information Act, and so on, across many liberal democracies, to make this an actuality, government transparency. And so there were several projects like this. WikiLeaks was the most successful of these projects because Julian combined his background as a programmer, as a computer engineer, to design an anonymous Dropbox, a way to anonymize sources, and introduce this technology into a journalistic endeavor. So this innovation really made a qualitative difference to the quality of sources that could be had by journalists, because you were technologically able to guarantee the anonymity. Secondly, WikiLeaks was the most successful because it also introduced, in 2010, the partnership with other media organizations. Julian understood that when you have big tranches of data, in order to take the most advantage of it journalistically, you need to partner with other newsrooms. There was simply too much to be able to just do justice to the material. And so he pioneered this partnership, which was unheard of journalistically until that point. Now you had it with the Panama Papers and the ICIJ and so on. But this was really a first. And the partners initially were very suspicious of each other, and it wasn't... it didn't come naturally to them, let's say. But the idea of cooperation was something that Julian brought in. And so WikiLeaks kind of represents journalism, government transparency, and accountability at the, maybe not its highest potential, but very close to it. What's happened over the last 12 years? Well, I think Julian's prosecution and persecution, it doesn't just symbolize how far away we are from where we started. It kind of tracks a greater trend. And that is why where we are right now, really, the outcome of Julian's case is kind of linked to, or is totally linked to, the larger context of loss of civil liberties, of loss of the rights of a citizen. Because what's happened over the last 12 years is that states have grown increasingly powerful in many different ways, but mainly through the control of information and the surveillance complex. And in the meantime, citizens have grown increasingly rightless. So this happened in part due to the war on terror. Lots of exceptions were carved into our protections, and they were rationalized, they were justified because we need to combat terrorism. But what happened? Well, they just kind of became the new normal. And once the so-called war on terror was no longer a thing, those carve-outs to our rights just stayed. And that's where we are. And once you start undermining the robustness of our rights, then it's just a slippery slope. And we haven't regained any of those rights. I think I can generalize. I don't know Norway, in any depth, but I'm talking more generally about what the standard is with liberal democracies. And it's partly because the United States has embarked on a journey to undermine its most central values, let's say. The values that it stands for in terms of its projection. Freedom of speech in the United States is the strongest protection for freedom of speech in the world, probably. And with this attack on Julian, they're going right to the heart of that, to undermine it. And that's how the New York Times editorial board put it. The Assange prosecution strikes at the heart of the First Amendment. That's the constitutional element that protects free speech and freedom of the press. Not just for journalists, for everyone. And so this is the first really frontal attack on the First Amendment ever. And where does it come from? Well, let's look at what's happened in the last 12 years. The Obama administration considered whether it should prosecute Julian alongside Chelsea Manning, because, as you probably all know, Julian is currently charged in relation to Chelsea Manning's publications, the Iraq War Logs, the Afghan War Diaries, the Guantanamo Bay detainee files, the diplomatic cables, and also the publication of Collateral Murder. The so-called rules of engagement concern collateral murder. The video in which 2 Reuters journalists were killed from a helicopter, gunship, and if you haven't seen this video, you must see it, because it kind of encapsulates what this case is about. Obama considered, when Chelsea Manning was going through her court-martial, whether there should be an attempt to prosecute Julian. Well, the Department of Justice at the time said, and they had all the evidence of the case in front of them, and they said, this administration is not willing to go after Assange. And the reason is this. They said, Julian Assange is a publisher, he's not a hacker. And secondly, they said, there's no way to go after Julian Assange without setting a precedent for the rest of the press. These were the 2 reasons that were given by the Obama administration for not prosecuting Julian, which is a very sound decision. When Trump got in, Trump had a very adversarial relationship with the press. And he was very angry at leaks. And he even talked about taking out the sources of leaks. And just recently, actually, I saw a video that must be a few weeks old, if that, in which Trump says that journalists, reporters who don't give up their sources should be put in prison so that they can be squeezed and give up their sources. And even said that once they realize they'll be raped in prison, then they'll give up their sources. and that's the way to do it. So, what was Trump's administration doing? The prosecution against Julian was taken precisely because it would enable the government to do that. Because it's not, it's the activity that is criminal, and the activity under the charges is to receive information from a source, to possess that information, and to communicate it to the public. Julian is not charged with espionage per se. He is charged under the Espionage Act, which is a very broad piece of legislation, which has very indeterminate language, which you could repurpose. For example, if you were reading the New York Times, which also publishes classified information, just the fact that you received that information, it's possessed in your head, that could be a violation of the Espionage Act. That's how wide-ranging it is. And you could say, well, I'm in Norway, that's the US. Well, no, because Julian is not a US citizen. He was not in the United States. He was publishing here in Europe. He was publishing together with multiple European publications, up to 100 publications in relation to the diplomatic cables, actually. And the US, with this case, has extended its jurisdiction beyond its borders and effectively declared the world as its jurisdiction insofar as it can control the press, as it can seize a publisher, seize whoever they want to apply the Espionage Act to, put them through a hellish extradition process, and then potentially extradite them to the US to spend the rest of their lives in prison. Now let's look at what Julian actually revealed. WikiLeaks revealed war crimes, actual documented war crimes. And so when it's a bit like what I was saying about the process. When we start talking about Julian's case, what we're not talking about is the unprosecuted war crimes. There are people who are responsible for murdering men, women, and children in cold blood, civilians. And their names are known. But here we are. So WikiLeaks also revealed how the US used its powers, its political power, to undermine and subvert the attempt by European countries to bring accountability. In the case of Spain, there was an attempt to prosecute several US soldiers who had killed a Spanish cameraman in Baghdad, in Hotel Baghdad. It's a very well-known incident. I think 2 journalists died that day, and it wasn't incidental. They were actually aimed at and clearly identifiable. So a US tank, I think it was, that shelled the hotel, and this Spanish cameraman was killed. And then the Spanish authorities tried to initiate an investigation, and the US embassy, through the cables, we know this, tried to shut it down. And, well, we're successful because the US military never faced justice for this. Another example, in Germany. A German citizen, Khalid al-Masri, who was abducted by the CIA. He was taken to black sites, he was tortured, and then the CIA realized they had the wrong Khalid al-Masri. And then they dumped him in Macedonia. He tried to take a case in the United States, and it was thrown out of court because they said, this concerns national defense matters. what happened? Well, eventually, he was able to use the diplomatic cables to win his case at the European Court of Human Rights. And what did those cables show? They showed that the US, not only that he had been renditioned because no one believed him when he showed up, from Macedonia with nothing on, I think just his clothes, and he said he had been abducted and tortured. No one believed him. But then these cables showed that it was true. And he won his case at the European Court of Human Rights. But these cables also showed that the US Embassy in Germany made sure that there was no extradition warrant for the known CIA agents that had tortured one of its citizens. So we're talking about European attempts to actually bring accountability, to do their thing, and interference to the detriment of European citizens. Julian stands for accountability. He embodies the principles set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He has actually put into practice the European Charter. He is the closest thing to democratic accountability. And what this persecution means is a fight between impunity and accountability. Julian's freedom is connected with democracy. It is connected with our right to truth, our right to tell the truth, our right as the public to receive the truth. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella. This was a very good introduction to the further discussion. And you ended up by talking about the European situation, actually, and the court system there. So I thought that made it a natural thing to let Thorbjørn Jagland be the first into the panel discussion. And his audience, of course, know Thorbjørn Jagland, many years politician for Labour Party, Prime Minister of Norway, Minister of Foreign Affairs, President of the Storting, and last but not least, Secretary General of Council of Europe. So this is why he has been especially interested in Norwegian responsibility to the whole European Court of Justice. And I'm sure many of you read a piece in Aftenposten today where he addresses exactly Norway's responsibility. So I guess you will elaborate on that, Thorbjørn. The floor is yours.
Yes, I will. And after I have listened to you, Stella Moris, I'm more convinced than ever that the silence of European governments is a shame. Because of the following. The European Convention is a human rights protection system which all the governments in Europe, save Belarus and now Russia, are obliged to uphold. And the basic principles are these. A person that has entered the European territory is under the protection of the European Convention on Human Rights, and that all the governments are obliged to uphold the standards and rules in the Convention, not only the country in question. It seems to me that many governments are taking the position that we cannot intervene in a court case in Great Britain. And this is a matter for Britain versus United States, which is not, because there is a collective responsibility for upholding the standards in the Convention. And as you said, and I totally agree with you, that what Julian Assange has done is to use his rights to freedom of expression and to provide the public with essential information, very essential information. And if he is being extradited to the United States, then all publishers, journalists, authors are in great danger. And this is a contradiction to the whole idea about the European Convention on Human Rights. That's the first point. Article 10 is essential in this convention. Secondly, he has been held in a hard security prison for more than 3 years, which affects Article 3 in the convention, namely that torture and inhuman treatment is totally forbidden. In all times, I mean, when it's war and then you have martial law, totally forbidden. And to keep a person in prison, in a hard security prison for more than 3 years, on pre-trial detention, is, as I see it, not in conformity with the European Convention on Human Rights. So this is a good reason for the European countries to intervene and ask, look, what is going on here? Thirdly, under the convention, every person has the right to a fair trial in due time. And I stress in due time. There are a number of judgments handed down by the European Court of Human Rights against European countries because of lengthy procedures in the courts. Thousands actually against Italy and Turkey, for example. And in this case, I would say that Great Britain is in the same category. 3.5 years in pre-trial detention without any decision is not in conformity with the rights in Article 6 in the Convention. And then there is another standard under Article 6, namely the right to equality of arms. You shall have the same possibility to defend yourself as the possibility of the prosecutor. And what we have heard about the efforts to undermine Julian Assange when he is in the court process, and that I don't know whether it is true or not, I'm not a judge here, that there has also been attempt to kill him, actually. This is, how can you have equality of arms under such circumstances? So this is another argument for European countries to look at how the proceedings are. Normally, they would demand that a person like this shall have the right to defend himself from freedom, or with certain limitations, but not in prison, not in a hard security prison, together with sitting there together with terrorists and other people that have been convicted for murder and violence. So, all in all, I would say that this is not only a matter for the UK government and the UK courts. This is a matter for all the 46 members of the Council of Europe that are responsible for the European Convention on Human Rights. And I would like to conclude by saying this, that opinions in Europe should not be in prison. You should have the right to express yourself. When a person is mistreated, we should not look in the other direction. We should act. This is about European humanism, that torture, inhuman treatment of people is totally forbidden. And you have the right to free trial. This is another important thing in the European humanism, and of course freedom of expression. So all in all, I would say that the silence of my government and other European governments is a shame. And I have witnessed during 10 years in Strasbourg that many governments very often used their rights to intervene in court processes. For instance, when it comes to Navalny in Russia, I appreciate that very much. Osman Kavala in Turkey, which is also appreciated. But why this silence about Navalny? We have to raise this question, and we have to put pressure on our government here to ask them to start asking the British government what is going on in your own country. I know that the Conservative government had on their agenda to abandon the European Convention on Human Rights. It hasn't happened yet, but as long as they are member of the European Convention, they should abide by the rules there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. We follow the line here. So the next out is Sofie Marhaug, Member of Parliament from the party Red. She has a background in her civilian life as a PhD student in literature, and also from local politics in the city council in Bergen, where she's elected from. She's presently the deputy chair of Stortingets Energy and Environment Committee. This is why you, in the broadcasting, hear talk more about electricity prices these days than Assange. But she's really committed to the Assange case and took the initiative to form a support group among Norwegian parliamentarians. And there are now 4 different parties who have members of that support group, and we will have a meeting with them tomorrow. So the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We still have a long way to go with the support group, but one of the first things I did after I got elected last fall was to take this initiative to create a support group for Julian Assange in the parliament. We have other support groups there, the support group for Palestine, the support group for Israel, which I'm not member of, but there are different support groups. And I think that's one way of putting pressure on the Norwegian government to make Julian Assange's case, to keep it warm, so to say. And I think it was very interesting and important what you, Stella Moris, said about Assange's the war crimes that he also put out in the press, because I believe that when still giving the case of Julian Assange, talking about it, making arrangements like this, it's a way of also reminding the public of those war crimes and the work that he did and is being silenced to do today. So I think it's not only about Julian Assange, but it's also about the person Julian Assange and the violation of human rights that Thorbjørn Jagland just spoke very correctly, in my opinion, about. And I think I believe the support group is important to put pressure on exactly those international conventions that we are part of, the European conventions. We have in several occasions asked our Minister of Foreign Affairs about the case of Julian Assange. And what she has been replying so far is that she has full trust in the British and American governments when it comes to the case of Julian Assange. And that is very, very depressing. It's not true. There's no reason, when you look at the facts, at the current situation, the torture-like imprisonment of Julian Assange, to have full trust in the British and American process of justice today. Instead, she should, and the Norwegian government should put press on the British government, because they are our closest allies. That's another important point to make. There are so many injustices, examples of injustice in the world, political prisoners, and of course, I'm not saying that we should turn away from those injustices either, but we have a special obligation when it comes to those kinds of violations that are being made by our allies. So I think that's a crucial point, and it's also essential. And this is my final point. It's essential to do this in order to still have a free press and a free and freedom of speech. That's essential. It's crucial to our democracy as such, and that's why I think the Norwegian Parliament, the Norwegian government, should engage in Julian Assange's case, because it's not only about Julian Assange. It's also about the possibility, the very fundament for democracy, namely freedom of speech and freedom of press. We can't just turn away from that. So yeah, that's what we're working on, and I'm very, very happy to welcome you to the Parliament tomorrow, where members from the Socialist Left Party, the Green Party, and the Farmers Party, even, or the Centre Party, will also take part.
Last but not least, Gisle Selnes will have the floor. He is, as many of you are aware, one of the most outspoken supporter of Julian Assange in the Norwegian public. He is, in his civilian life, professor in literature at University in Bergen. And a fun fact is that he, I believe, is the supervisor of the thesis. He has written extensively in his own field, essays and books. His most important publication in this context is that he, together with his colleague Frode Helmik Pedersen, this summer published the book Persecution of Assange. And those of you who haven't read it should do so. The floor is yours, Gisle.
Thank you. As an academic, I have a paper. It's only 50 pages long. Well, there are many aspects to the Assange case. Of course, there is the humanitarian side, and you have the chilling effect it obviously has had and will continue to have if nothing happens, turning the case in a positive direction. But there is also what I find the sad circumstance, showing how easily parts of the public accept a situation kind of as part of the social texture of our lives, that we have this Australian journalist imprisoned in the heart of the Western world by our own closest allies. You perhaps recall the pictures that came out of Abu Ghraib, of the torture scenes. One of the main aspects demonstrating that this was nothing out of the ordinary was the way in which the guard and other staff seemed totally relaxed and indifferent to what was going on. This was evidently business as usual. In a similar way, as a society, we seem to have grown so familiar with the fact that Assange is imprisoned in a maximum security prison, targeted by the true criminals whose wrongdoings he has exposed, that this scandalous injustice is hardly reported any longer by our news outlets or commented on, addressed by the large majority of our politicians. Ask yourselves, when was the last time you read a genuinely critical analysis of Assange's legal situation written by a Norwegian journalist or heard it broadcasted by a Norwegian media outlet? I believe you will have a hard time searching your brain or the internet for an answer. With a few honest exceptions, mostly traceable to one and the same leftist Norwegian newspaper, the press in this alleged top-notch country when it comes to freedom of press has not been reporting on the Assange case, on the process against Assange. There has, however, been quite a few editorials published in support of Assange, which of course is encouraging enough, but for lack of genuine reporting, they tend to misconstrue or downplay both the injustice of the case and the real danger we will face if the extradition and conviction of Assange under the US Espionage Act is acknowledged as enforceable law. One thing is, well, that Aftenposten, which, as you know, got hold of the entire Cablegate cash back in 2010, could actually, as Stella indicated, be prosecuted by at least some of the paragraphs that Assange is now facing, the pure publication section part of the Espionage Act. And during the extradition hearings in 2020, US lawyers claimed, as Stella also indicated, that there was nothing preventing the US Department of Justice from prosecuting journalists under the Espionage Act for doing their job. That is, for reporting on national security issues in a way that the US government considers harmful to its own interests. Yet, even the possession of a newspaper containing classified information of this kind could be considered an act of espionage under this archaic law, originally concocted in order to contain anti-militarist and trade unionists during World War I. Of course, neither Aftenposten nor its readers are going to be prosecuted for the past violations of the Espionage Act. Assange is being targeted and mistreated in order to send a message to today's and tomorrow's journalists and whistleblowers, not yesterday's. That is one of the reasons why the case against him should be dropped. It is blatantly political. It's an instrumentalization of the juridical system of several states in what amounts to a lawfare with highly unequal arms. Imagine a scenario where a US source leaks truthful yet classified information concerning the recent sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines to a Norwegian journalist. Regardless of who the responsible is for the sabotage, the US Department of Justice might, under the very same pure publication paragraphs in the Espionage Act, indict this journalist for having willfully communicated, delivered, or transmitted information relating to the national defense information of which she or he, the journalist, has unauthorized possessions. I am not a lawyer myself, but I don't feel at all assured that the Norwegian government would resist US pressure to extradite this hypothetical journalist. There seems to be loopholes in the bilateral US-Norwegian extradition treaty. And we all know, and we just heard from Sofie, what is our own present Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt's take on US extraterritorial jurisdiction and violation of due process. This is a complicated case, has been her answer when confronted with her notorious passivity in the Assange case. It is not natural, naturlig is the Norwegian word, for a Norwegian government, she says, to comment on independent legal processes in the UK and the US. And she also takes for granted, she says, that both the US and Great Britain comply with international humanitarian conventions, despite all evidence to the contrary, such as several UN reports ignored by Assange's enemies. You indicated also, Rune, that I should say a few words about the reception of the book I co-wrote with Frode Helmik Pedersen and published this summer. It's not time to go into details, but neither are details necessary, I believe. The reception of our book is symptomatic, I believe, of the state of affairs when it comes to the lack of Assange coverage in the Norwegian press. There were no harsh negative reviews of the book, some very positive, one that had no critical objection whatsoever. But the most common and perhaps the most symptomatic judgment was that the book is readable and informative enough, yet it lacks a truly critical assessment of Assange's work as a publisher. We are too benevolent towards Julian Assange. However, our own primary goal was to expose the lies and machinations of which Assange has been a victim, which actually make for more than just one book, not to convene him as a person to some kind of preposterous judgment day. Perhaps equally symptomatic is that the media outlets with the highest stake in the Assange case, such as Aftenposten in Oslo and Bergen in Bergen, both of which are strongly criticized in the book, chose not to review it. Neither did NRK, the Norwegian broadcasting company, to whose advisory board I had filed a complaint for repeated false statements in 2 of their programs, this year actually, featuring, among others, 2 of Aftenposten's journalists, a case which we also comment on in the book. Perhaps needless to say, my complaint was not upheld by the advisory board, and the attempt to rectify the false statements in an op-ed submitted to the company's online news outlet was finally rejected. Of course, and with this I will end, it's not a human right to get one's op-eds published or one's book reviewed. Normally, I would find it quite embarrassing even to be talking about these things. Yet to my mind, this case is different. It's more than different, it's exceptional. It demonstrates clearly how easy it is to get airtime and newspaper space for presenting unverified rumors and negative assessments about an imprisoned journalist who is unable to defend himself, under the pretext that news coverage should be balanced. So in Assange's case, and this is actually one of the arguments used by the Norwegian Broadcasting Company, they find it appropriate to invite people who, without having done any proper research on the process against him, thinks that he is a bad guy, or at least that there are some murky issues that we should not forget when we talk about the persecution of Julian Assange. But If you wish to point out the factual errors, there is no time or no space left, especially if you state your points in what could be perceived as a too direct manner. I find this mindset both dishonest and depressing.
Thank you so much to the panel. Before we open up for questions, I want to address to the panel and ask for a comment on a couple of issues that I think should be mentioned. One is the obvious violation of Julian Assange's juridical rights, inclusive his violation of communication with his lawyers. You know, when he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, we all know now that there was total surveillance. His communication, which should be, privileged, were violated. And it was known this summer that lawyers and journalists who visited the embassy has gone to a court case against former Foreign Minister Pompeo and CIA because their equipment when entering the embassy was tapped, copied, and one of the journalists who took part in this lawsuit said that it did not only violate his work with the Assange case, but he worked for several German media, and he had never expected to a violation of his source protection on all his journalistic activity. This is quite unusual. Why, under normal circumstances, I think this would be called a mistrial because there's so much irregularity. And I want to draw attention to Daniel Ellsberg. We all know him from Pentagon Papers. He said, I did the same as Julian Assange. His case was dropped because of mistrial, because Nixon administration had broken into his psychiatrist's office. I mean, this is a small case to what Julian Assange has been subject to. So why are there not more principled outcry about this treatment? Perhaps you as a lawyer, Stella.
Well, I think there are different answers to that. One is the obvious complicity of complicity insofar as a certain narrative has been pushed about Julian. And even now that the facts that are there for everyone to see are out in the open, and the arbitrariness and outright illegality conducted by the United States in relation to getting Julian imprisoned and even planning to kidnap and murder him, that's all out in the open. And so I think there's a problem. It supposes a problem for some of the press that have been furthering those narratives that basically were pushed to undermine him, to attack his reputation, to attack his political capital that he needed, that he needs in order to fight a political case. And so it would require some kind of reckoning. Actually, we were wrong about when we said that Julian Assange was just paranoid about the US. We were wrong about, actually he was being arbitrarily detained when the UN said that he was being arbitrarily detained, and we ignored it, that we were wrong. There has been no reckoning, and so it's a bit of a taboo issue, because the public, I think the public is quite more intelligent than the press gives it credit for. And there's this kind of disconnect between the narrative they were pushing for all these years and Julian's being in Belmarsh prison for almost 4 years and facing 175 years in the United States in relation to the Chelsea Manning case. Now in 2010, 2011, 2012, and so on, up until his arrest, you had people saying, Julian Assange will never be extradited to the United States for publishing about Iraq and Afghanistan. No one would ever tolerate it. There would be, revolution. It would be, no, look where we are. There has been a progressive march into increasing authoritarianism, and the best indicator of that is tolerance to freedom of speech, tolerance in relation to dissent, in relation to revealing state wrongdoing and being able to, and there being consequences for that.
Could that violation of client lawyers' affairs be a point for the Human Rights Court, European Human Rights Court?
Of course, I don't know how you see the future, whether if you lose the case in the appeal in the United Kingdom, whether you will go to the European Court of Human Rights. But of course, if that happens, then what you pointed out will be essential, namely, has this person had the right to a fair trial in due time and with equality of arms. This is a specific standards under Article 6. And this is why I think that the European government should intervene now, because they have the obligation to see to it that there is a fair trial in all the European countries. This is not only a business for United Kingdom. It is a business for us all. And of course, all the European governments have been under great pressure from the United States. But this is also something which I point out in the article in Aftenposten today, namely that in the past, I mean, if you look at what happened when we had the military coup in Greece at the time, there the conservative foreign minister handed down a case to the European Court of Human Rights. There was, I mean, a big outcry in the United States. How could you do that against a NATO member? But it was done by the conservative foreign minister, because this was about European humanism. There was large-scale violation of European Convention on Human Rights, such as torture, that even introduced capital punishment, and there were no fair trials, and so on and so on. So it was done. But now, when a person like Julian Assange is sitting in a high security prison in the United Kingdom under these circumstances, and there is absolutely clear that he hasn't got a fair trial in due time, then everybody is silent. I mean, we should stand up and say that we demand that our governments are protecting our rights on this continent. And of course, he cannot be extradited to the United States. I think, with all my knowledge about the European protection system, and that's a lot, he cannot be extradited to the United States and being charged under the Espionage Act. In Europe, we do not have 175 years of imprisonment. Maximum is 25 years. For instance, just to mention that. So we have to protect our own standards and our values on this continent. Thank you.
Sofie, Gisle, do you have comments to this legal issue? Yeah.
I'm also I'm no expert in juridical questions, but I think the point being made initially about the process being part of the punishment, I think it's also crucial here, because it's about you get so numb, like you just get used to normal procedures not being followed because it just is prolonged so long, and it's kind of a strategy of exhaustion that's being made. And I think that's very dangerous to any legal system, this kind of strategy. I think it's very dangerous, and I think it's extremely dangerous if we at any point accept to extradite someone to the US. And this is more a political point maybe, but I also believe that maybe I shouldn't make this here, but American or US presence in Europe and US laws, for instance, with the American basis in the change of policy in Norway, is maybe part of the same tendency, not the same, but yeah, it's similar.
Okay.
Well, yeah, there was an attempt to bring these issues before the district judge in the processes in 2020, but they were mostly rejected, and that's why they are coming up in the United States as a case of their own. But of course there is a violation of due process. It's so evident, but well, it's not accepted actually as part of the extradition hearings because they allegedly do not have strong enough consequences for the points the US government is trying to make in order to get Assange extradited. Well, and there, as we know, there is a case going on now in Spain, and they are trying to get Mike Pompeo to witness there. But of course, this case has been going on for years. There was a testimony by Julian Assange in 2019, I believe, but the entire case has been postponed by, well, interfere with the United States not wanting to take part in this in these court hearings that have to do with exactly the surveillance, the illegal surveillance of the Ecuadorian embassy in London. So no, well, that's just one of several examples of the inequality of arms in this case. I don't know, those points might come up before a special tribunal in the United States if Assange is extradited, but well, that would already be a case lost for Stella and Julian Assange. It has to be stopped before it gets there.
Thank you. I think it's time to open for questions from the audience. There is a microphone going around somewhere. The area. And please present yourself.
Hi, my name is Kjersti Løken Stavrum. I'm head of Norwegian PEN. Thank you very much, Stella, for coming to Norway all this way to raise awareness to this important case. I would love Norway to have a central part in solving this issue. I agree very much with Thorbjørn Jagland that all European governments should engage in it as well. But I wondered if you could help me understand a little bit more. The country that surprises me the most all the time is Australia. Why has they not done anything in this case? And when they changed government now, I was convinced that now the diplomacy will start and they will sort of bring him out of Belmarsh. But please, what's your take on this?
Well, I think I want to give the current government the benefit of the doubt. So far, their efforts have failed, if there have been efforts. And the only test to see if they're actually serious about it is if Julian is released. Is it achievable? Of course it is. But the fact is that the US and Australia and the UK and New Zealand and Canada are part of the Five Eyes. And the Five Eyes are... How many of you know what the Five Eyes are? Okay. The Five Eyes are the not many, compared to what it should be. The Five Eyes is the intelligence alliance between those countries, the 5 countries, English speaking. And there is kind of a completely unaccountable union, detached from democratic oversight. We don't really, I think even the governments for each of those countries don't even really have an insight into that relationship, because it's prized above all else. Of course, in this alliance, Australia is actually a key player, because it is in the Pacific region, and China is, of course, of utmost importance to the United States. So Australia actually has, it's not just some minor member of this alliance, it is the crucial one. And it can push. And I'd say that Australia, because of its geopolitical significance, Norway, because of its pretty much unique position in the world, just Norway is kind of the country that in the human rights world you can rely on taking the right position, right? There are just a few of these countries who can actually push the dial in order to secure Julian's freedom. They need to hear it from their allies. And they need to hear it, and if Australia is pushing behind the scenes, which they try to give the impression that they are, and other allied countries like Norway, who actually have a very significant, you give the Nobel Peace Prize here, what else, It is the world reference for peace and human rights, right? And it has to be here. The leadership has to come from Norway. Australia plays a role as well because he's their citizen, and so on. But there are just a few handful of countries who can actually play the role that needs to that we need in order to get Julian free.
There was another question.
I'm Elizabeth Eide, professor at Oslo Met, and one of the 3 professors who actually twice have nominated Julian Assange for the Nobel Peace Prize, together with Gisle and Rune. So that's said, if you didn't know.
Thank you.
But my question has to do with your mentioning of the Five Eyes, because what is also a fact that very few here might know is that Norway is a member of the Nine Eyes, a little bit larger collection of eyes, to put it that way. So my question would go to the 2 politicians in the panel here. What is the chance that Norway, you place great hopes on Norway, Stella, but what is the chance that Norway, member of the Nine Eyes, headed by the US, when it comes to intelligence, would actually be able to play a lead role in the anti-extradition of Julian Assange?
Well, as I've already said, we should be in the lead. And I know very well what is the security position of Norway. But what happens now is actually contrary to our traditions in Norway. We haven't always followed an order from United States. when it comes to human rights. I refer to what happened with Greece at the time. They had the courage to stand up and say this is not about security, the relations between the United States and Europe. It had to do with the European human rights protection system, and we have to protect it. And you cannot decide on behalf of us. We have to decide on behalf of us, ourselves. And this is what happened. And we have, I mean, during the years, we have many examples that the Norwegian government has taken different positions to what the United States has taken. I mean, with regard to the Palestinian conflict, many other examples can be mentioned. So what happens now is not in conformity with Norwegian tradition, actually. And we should remind our government here that Norway was one of the 10 founding fathers of the European Convention on Human Rights, and we have to protect this system, and we have to intervene. We have a collective responsibility. We cannot accept what is being said now. We cannot intervene in a court case. This is a business for United Kingdom. No, it's not. It's our collective business to protect human rights on this continent. So, for the time being, I'm not very optimistic. But at the same, and of course, Gisle, you refer to what happened in the Norwegian press, but there is also growing attention in the public at large in Norway for what is happening with Julian Assange, and we have to play on that.
Yeah, I'm also afraid that some of those traditions you are referring to are disappearing or we're forgetting them. So I think it's necessary to remind that there's another more independent tradition for foreign policies, and we have other international European commitments that we should be reminded of. So I agree with what you said, but I'm also not very optimistic. I also nominated Julian Assange for the Nobel Peace Prize without any success. But I think the opinion, what's more positive is that I believe the opinion, public opinion in Norway and in many Western countries is there's a shift again. There's been several shifts, which Gisle has written about, and I think we're seeing like a new shift, more sympathetic shift towards Julian Assange, which is very, very necessary if the government are going to do anything, making any press, putting any press on Britain, for instance, or the US.
Then we have one more question before we round up soon.
Hi, hi. My name is Lars Klevstand. I'm a novelist and a poet, and I'm wondering, since this is such a political case, how does the current political chaos in Great Britain affect the case, and does it hurt it, or is there some kind of movement among the politicians who have something to say that can affect the case in a positive or negative direction?
In terms of the UK political dynamics, I think today we had a new prime minister. I think it's. I think the UK has a lot of problems to deal with, and that they could do without Julian's problem, as in they could do without having to drag this along and face condemnation and, you know, the incredible credibility hit that is being taken by the UK judicial system. I mean, just look at, this conversation. I mean, it reflects the truth. But the thing is, it's obvious for any, bystander who's observing this to say, well, this clearly, there's something seriously wrong here. Especially after this, which we haven't really touched upon, but the news that that under Pompeo, the CIA has very advanced plans to kidnap Julian from the embassy, which I think were very concrete because of some things that I recall from that period. There was an effort to get him to leave the embassy. And I think that was part of their plans to seize him, or worse, and even plans to murder him. How can you possibly have an extradition when you have in the public domain a report of such grave magnitude against the person who is potentially being extradited? And the CIA did not deny it. In fact, Pompeo effectively confirmed it. He said that the sources of that piece, which were over 30, that's 30, from the CIA, from the National Security Council, and others, some of them named, that the sources should be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. So there's no denial. When we brought this up in relation to the US's appeal a few months ago, the judge just said, well, of course the CIA would have an interest in Julian Assange. And the barrister bolted up and he said, we're not talking about interest here. We're talking about assassination. Like, how can we even be sitting here? This is part of my frustration. And talking about process. This is violence of the state being taken against an individual. And he is being paraded so that others can see you do not expose US crimes. And beyond the kind of security alliance, the intelligence alliance, kind of a bit abstract again. But look, just someone sent me a message yesterday that Sweden is looking to reform its constitution to be able to prosecute publishers. I mean, I haven't looked at this in detail, but they just kind of said, do you know about this? Publishers in the same way that Julian's being prosecuted. In the UK, you see how they're trying to reform their Espionage Act in a way, not Espionage Act, Official Secrets Act, to mirror the US Espionage Act. What is the effect of this? It's, the relationships between states. When it comes to intelligence and security matters, they start pushing for alignment of legislation. And this has a very detrimental effect on the general state, the health of press freedom in the European zone. The chilling effect of the attack on Julian, it's not just that the US might come for Aftenposten. It's about it's extremely pernicious, and it is subtle. And it is also a general crash of standards on press freedom and on freedom of speech, because the two are linked. Around the world, they see Julian's case, which is so high profile. Well, if they can go against Julian Assange, these countries that say they defend press freedom, well, we can do that too. And we won't even face any consequences, because when Julian's case, when someone, goes to Azerbaijan and says, stop putting dissidents and journalists in jail, President Azerbaijan said, look what you're doing to Julian Assange. You're killing him in a British prison. And he's right. It's not whataboutism. It is citizens and the press, we all lose. We're the losers.
Well, I think that sums up quite well, actually. And before Lars Klevstand closes the meeting with another song, I just want to thank you for coming and sharing your experience, and thank to the panel for contributing. Do you have any final comment, Stella? Or?
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone for being here, and that, you know, what I've experienced over the last, 2 years progressively is a huge amount of solidarity and humanity, because, and that's what's needed. I mean, that's the only thing we've got, really. When the systems fail, we need to band together and fight back, and stand up for the best part of, of our culture and tradition.
Could it be possible for us to ask you, Stella, to give our regards to Julian?
Of course.
Our love directly. Always remember to be here with you, and you are in a kind of a representative of Julian Assange as the prisoner in 1935 who got the Nobel Peace Prize, Karl von Ossietzky. It's very similar, and why don't we see it? So I would say to Sofie, try to get all the national parliamentarians to go together and talk to this new Indian Prime Minister who should be proud of Gandhi, and try to open the doors. Julian Assange should be free.
Thank you, even without a microphone.
Just before Lars gets the floor, on behalf of PEN Norway, I want to give you all a book of translated poems by one other of our honorary members. That is İlham Çumak from Turkey, who is in jail now and has been there for 28 years. Innocent and in jail for 28 years. And what has he done? He's written 9 books, poetry books. In the last 7 years, he's been in solitary confinement. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Is it possible to comment with a song to all these wise words and all the problems we are discussing? In a way, I think Nordahl Grieg did, a famous writer, poet and theater. He went to the civil war in Spain between the 2 world wars, and he participated, and he wrote, I think, a very precise text of what we are talking about here. Spanish theater. Stiger menneskets trossige vilje, kunstens kjempende ord, gløder i dette teatret på Spanias blodige jord. Unge militssoldater, tusener trette menn, føler de tro i sitt hjerte, før de skal slåss igjen. De er ikke lenger så ensom, ød er ikke så koldt. Det som de hører fra scenen, vittner at fronten ble holdt. Fjerne land århundrer sier det i sin sang. Aeschylus, Calderon, Schiller, Pushkin, Romain Rolland. Den frie stridende tanken, rettverdets høye krav, kjemper usynlig med dem i deres skyttergrav. Vi i vårt land er skånet, vi går i vår frie vær. Krev derfor mer av ditt hjerte, fordi du ikke er med. Hjelp dine spanske brødre, gi dem som takk din hånd. De holder den fronten du tror på, menneskets frie ånd. Menneskets frie ånd. Thank you so much. Thank you.